Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are honored to have Foundation for Inner Peace President Tam Morgan with us. As I'm sure many of you know, the Foundation for Inner Peace is the original publisher of A Course in Miracles, and Tam has been involved with the foundation since its inception, making her very much a part of the Course's story. Tam's mother, Judith Skutch-Whitson, was co-founder of the Foundation for Inner Peace, whereupon Tam met Course scribes Helen Schucman and Bill Thetford in 1975. Tam became formally involved with the foundation in 1984, and in 2016, she became co-president alongside her dear friend, the late Bob Rosenthal. Tam, as I was just saying before we hit record, it's such an honor and a pleasure and a privilege for us to have you here. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Of course, and the honor is mutual.
So we thought, Tam, that we would try to just follow things along on a logical timeline, start at the beginning.
Okay.
So as we understand the story, you were a big part of your mother being interested in and then very actively involved in parapsychology. And that, of course, led to her being exposed to A Course in Miracles. What can you tell us about your part in what led to her first getting into parapsychology and then the Course?
So, yes, as a child, this was all stuff I kept hidden for years, but from my social life, I should say. But as a child, I had a lot of, guess what we'd call intuition. I hated the word psychic, but there it was out there, which is why I kept so much close, because back then, particularly back east, there was a lot of fear around it. And but as a young child, I knew things that I say are silly. It was like knowing who would be on the phone if who was about to call, or knowing the phone would be about to ring and who would be on it. If my mother stubbed her toe in another room, I would feel it. Very much an empath, as we have those words today to describe much more commonly. And I had a lot of precognitive dreams, dreams of usually unpleasant things that were about to happen. And it caught my mother's attention. Did not catch my father's attention. He was mostly at work, and I would, go and get my mother a baby aspirin when I felt she had a headache and things like that seemed unusual to her. And yet she was very interested in it and was not up for telling me they weren't true. So the thing that mattered to me as a child, because she ended up, as she got involved in parapsychology, was involving me, as I called it, the guinea pig, and a lot of the experiments that were being done. She was rarely in those with me, but I was, and she really made it fun. She put a lot of effort into making it fun during my childhood. But the thing that was the most relevant story to me, that I have a memory of as well, is when I used to spend every night before I went to sleep talking to my friend. And I would say what was going on during the day and this and that. I'd report in, like, this happened, that happened. I liked this, I didn't like this. And when she finally, one day, she used to listen by the door. And she finally came in one day and said, "Who are you talking to?" And I said, "My friend." And she said, "Was your friend tiny and, little tiny being?" Because I love small things as well. And I said, "No, it's not tiny." And she kept asking, "Is it as big as a bread box?" She kept going on. And I said, "No, my friend is everywhere. It's everything. It's bigger than everything you can think of." And what I remember is less the words of the conversation that she told in the story, but her reaction to it. It was almost like, okay, keep going, and backing up. And me thinking, is that strange? Is that weird? And I was at such a young age that it hardly registered. And it was, it was something she never took away from me. but there was something within the psychic. As my mother got really interested in the psychic and all those games, I was loving to play the games, but I wasn't always caring to be front row center in them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there was a little, sometimes ho-hum. There was a little times I felt I had to perform. I better do this right. And that made me nervous, and taught me the difference between trying to do something or releasing to allow it to be done. And also, as I got to like 7th grade, things happening that made me start hiding it because of people's reaction. For instance, I was in a class, a math class. I was horrible at math. My brother was a math genius, and I was horrible. And I took a test, and in the test, there was a kind of pre-calculus. Maybe it was algebra. I can't even remember. But there was an equation that the teacher said, for extra credit, if you got the equation, then you'd immediately get an A on the test. So I thought, well, then why bother reading the text, the rest of it, by doing that? So I went straight to that. And my great grandmother had recently passed away, and she was great at math. And so I saw the question, and I closed my eyes, and I got my answer from my great grandmother form. Here's the answer. And I wrote it down. Next thing I know, I'm in the principal's office, and my mother's there. And, I had cheated, and I got the answer because I showed no work. And I remember saying, it never said I had to show the work, like I didn't show the work. And my mother started to explain to the math teacher in front of the principal that I had this ability, and as you know. And from then on, my math teacher was not my teacher. He'd come to me and go, do you know what my girlfriend's thinking about me? And it was so creepy to me. But
oh my gosh.
That's indicative of how I saw even the scientists who were working with me, if I did something, imbuing me with a power that was so not my interest. But there was that, so that the evolution in my childhood, when my mother started to get, I would say, satiated by psychic research and research in the paranormal, and got to have a real yearning for something more spiritually based, and her setups in her life to lead her to the course. I was at that time 14, 15, and so relieved. Like, I was off the hook. I didn't have to be like looked at to be in the movie The Exorcist anymore. Things that came in my life of like, wait. And my mother and I consciously now got to separate in paths in a certain way, even though we're along the same path. Of Course in Miracles was not my way. That's my mom's stuff. But I was thrilled that we were moving into heart.
I've had my nose in this book, Double Vision, that you co-wrote with your mother. And you talk a lot about your abilities as a child, extrasensory perception, psychic phenomena, and whatnot. And I love the stories. Although what you're saying now strikes me as what I'm reading in here, there is a parlor trick mentality to it. Mm-hmm. Some of what you were asked to do, like Jerry Jampolsky asking you if you knew the odometer on his car, which amazingly you did. And
I did in spite.
Yeah,
I did out of spite. Yeah.
One thing that you say in here, though, is that there was a moment where you were kind of backing away from that ability, and you said you heard like a click where the door had kind of shut on that for you. And I'm wondering if you found the key to that door, if you opened it back up as an adult, if you use those skills now, and if so, how?
One, it's very funny to me that you say I co-wrote it with my mother. We co-authored it. We did not co-write it. What the story of Double Vision was that I was graduating college a year early, and I was going off to Nepal. And I had an English teacher. I still had 2 credits lingering. And I had an English teacher with whom I'd become very close. And she said, look, if when you come back from Nepal, you write me the story of all these stories that you tell me about your childhood, I'll give you 2 A's right now. Before you even leave, you can graduate and go free and not have to come back and finish this. And she knew I was good for it. So I went off to Nepal for my time. And when I came back, it was like reverse culture shock, because I had been so immersed in another culture that was so different than growing up in New York City. And, like sleeping on water buffalo dung, using my left hand for toilet paper, lice in my hair, very different for whole other stories. Anyway, I came back and I needed to ground and I needed to regroup. And I had journals from way, way back, all my journals piled up. And I went through my journals and I wrote like an 800 and something page manuscript about the stories of my childhood. And my mother read it. And she said, no, it didn't happen that way. It happened this way. No, it didn't. And I said, but Mom, I'm writing from my journals. And she said, well, I have my journals too, and my perception too. And as a joke for one of her birthdays, I wrote a little thing of what it would look like. She says, story of what it would look like of both of us telling this. And it was like a funny birthday parody joke, and it was sitting on her desk. And at one point David Hines came along from 10 Speeds, then Celestial Arts Publishing, and my mother went off to the bathroom. He was standing by her desk. He sees this and he says, I want to do this. And my mother said, do what? And he said, I want to write this as a book. I want to publish this as a book. And she said, no, I'm not writing, and this is my daughter's stuff. And he said, call her and ask her. So she called me and I said, no way. These were my private journals, and my own experiences. And, it wasn't in any way all about psychic experiences. And he wanted to do it and literally just pick out the psychic stuff. Mm. So it's like, I'm not going to do that. And honestly, the real truth of the matter is I did want to be a writer professionally. My mother said to me, it's good to be published. It's good to be a published author at age 25, 24, actually closer to at that time, it might have been 23 when I started to look at doing it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then he offered me an advance. And it was like, okay, this really is professional. I'll do it. So I let the editor come in and take out all my selections that were psychic involved. And my mother then wrote her part separate, completely separate. And as I started to read her part, and I read her, I got to a section in the very beginning where she said, something like my daughter would come home and explode all the light
bulbs.
Okay.
I was going to ask you about that. I
started to read that and I got furious. And I called up my mother and I went, what are you saying here? Like, what would happen from my perspective was I'd come home and I might be in like a certain kind of premenstrual mood is all I can call it at the moment. And I'd come home and I'd turn on a light bulb and it would explode. When you blow a light bulb, the light bulb would go off, period. And then it might have happened in 2 rooms, maybe. But it did happen a couple of times where I'd go and dip, and they'd go out. We also replaced them at the same time, by the way. I still have my scientific mind within my own being. And when she said whatever she did say, explode or whatever words she used at the time, I took such offense. I said, why do you have to embellish the story when it's enough as it was? Like it was.
She says the flicker became a burnout, and as the weeks wore on, the shattering began, a nice gentle progression of poltergeist phenomena.
Never, see, I'm so glad you're even bringing this up. Now, never once, from my memory and my experience, never once was there a shattering of the bulb.
That's hilarious. I read that and I looked at Robert, and we were sitting in bed. I looked at Robert and I was like, damn. And he was like, we got to ask her about that.
Okay.
Because we were skeptical. We were thinking, was there actual shattering or not?
Never that to my memory, never was there. Maybe my stepfather took the bulb and dropped it on the ground, and my mother came in and thought, I cannot tell you other people's truths. I can only tell you from my world, there was never a shattering. I mean, and I would have been scared myself if there was a shattering, to tell you the truth. But so the moment I read that, I was so mad at her, and I called her up, and I was just like, there is no way. And she said, well, was my experience. And I mean, I knew she was a storyteller. And when I hung up and I felt my own anger with her, I meditated. And what I heard, and as I say, the one thing I'm wedded to in my life is my own hearing, my own listening to that voice. And I heard, basically, your mother is supporting you. She doesn't want to write a book right now. She never wanted to write a book. She didn't want to write these stories. She's supporting you as a writer. She's supporting this story. She is a storyteller. So are you. Who's to say your version of the truth is truth, even in your own even in your own journals? What can, and my response to my own voice was, she's giving me love. How can I respond back? And the only way I knew to respond back in love was to never read another word she wrote in that book. And I never have to this day. I'm going to at some point, but I couldn't do it because we would have just argued continuously from our own perspectives, which is exactly what the joke on her desk was, the parrot.
Well, I can tell you the rest of it's very tame by comparison. That is the thing that stood out. I got the page dog-eared.
Time has come, and my mother's dead, so she can't dead. So she, she can only respond however she would as a poltergeist coming from the beyond to show up. Like, if she stops this webinar at this moment, it won't be me.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was back at Miracle Distribution Center in the 80s and it came out, it was like, she says this, and because it's such very personal information in places, it was quite, attention getting for us.
I just ignored it from then on. It was like, okay, we did that, got published, and, I usually more in the present, the past. I don't listen to a webinar that I do. I don't go back that way. But I will. It's if I'm missing my mother too much, I might pick it up so that I can not miss her quite as much if I get to that section.
You have a question that you want to ask, but just while we're talking about Judy and hearing, do you hear from her? Do you feel your mother's presence? Do you feel her communicating with you still?
Tremendously. I feel from her. Way more than hear from her. I feel her presence showing up at different times in different places, and it brings me laughter. And I think I did a webinar about when I first actually saw her, which was just recently, and it was in a dream, as I went to West Point Academy to bury her ashes with my stepfather, Bill Whitson's ashes. And that morning of the burial was the first dream I'd had since she passed. And it was full-blown, very conscious, awake dream, although I was dreaming, that she came to visit me at the end of the bed. And what happened in that was extremely meaningful to me. But I have felt her presence in certain places where she's dropped in. And when I say felt her presence, it's within character. I have heard her. The more she kept telling me, when I said, I'm really going to miss you when you go, she said, oh, I'm going to be bigger than ever. I'm going to be bigger than ever. And I would laugh going, really, what do you mean by that? She said, I don't know what I mean by that, but you'll see, I'll be more omnipresent for you in love than I am now. And she wasn't a threatening Jewish mother, like, I'm going to be watching you. And the night, I was with her the morning that she passed, and then there were floods in my house and I couldn't get to my house. Trees had fallen. So I had to sleep in her bed the night after her body was removed, and I still slept in her bed, and I was asleep. And in the morning, I woke up and in my mind, the first thing I said and did, like I felt I wasn't sleeping in her indentation. I was sleeping and she had a king bed. So I was sleeping next to her indentation. And I felt over, I said, Mom, are you still dead? That's just the question that came to my mind. And I heard full force with laughter. And you can say it was my mind. I don't care. But it was, now I'm Obi Mom Kenobi. And I just started laughing. I woke up, came conscious, just laughing. And that's the kind of thing. I have thoughts that I'm not consciously thinking that come through and sound like her, where I acknowledge it's her presence. But I literally held her and watched her finally do what she wanted, which is to evanesce into love. She just melted into love in my arms. And so it's more what happened that surprised me. Every time I feel that feeling of love and connection with someone, she's present. And that's how I hear from her much more. So to double back and answer your other question about what parts are open in me and what parts closed down. The part when I said something closed down, it was being open about the psychic. I closed down from relating it to people. In my assessment, my greatest ability in the world of intuitive was very much being able to look at a human being and see, like an architect would see cracks in a foundation, like, okay, that house is not going to work because of this reason, or this is what's threatening to its structure. I can literally see, or figuratively see, the cracks in someone's foundational heart around what brings them fear to love, from love, I should say, not to love. And it can come in story form. Oh, your mother did this and that to you. Your father did this. You were abandoned as a child. Like, it will come in story form that I try and push out. It's more like, oh, that's where you are right now. That's this moment. That's the block. And so it's again, it comes in narrative sometimes. That's not to say that I don't still have a dream that comes true. That's the thing that clicked off literally in that story in the book was, I think, auras, where my mother told me all about Edgar Cayce and seeing auras. And I thought that was the coolest story. And then one day she asked me to send a message to my grandmother to call home. There was something urgent. And I sent the message. And then my mother came back and said, how did you do that? She'd never actually asked me that. And I told her I'd sit in front of the mirror. In fact, we had a mirror in the bathroom where you sit on the toilet and you're watching yourself in the mirror. So I sat on the closed toilet seat, look in the mirror until I started to dissolve. And as I dissolved, I said to her, you'd see all these colors around and then disappear. And when the disappearance happened, I knew I could send the message. And I was like a channel to love into another person. And she said to me, oh, you mean auras? And I said, no, not auras. I mean, just like when you get your eyes fuzzy and that happens. And she said, do you see it with other people? I said, well, as soon as my eyes go fuzzy, I can see that. And she said, that's auras. And I got like, I had always wanted to see auras, but something in it being more real to me and not Edgar Cayce, who she'd blown up in a certain way for me. I got scared. It's like, no, I want to be normal. And that was a huge theme in my life. I wanted to be normal. It's like, and so I stopped seeing auras so effortlessly. As I grew up and had my privacy and sensitivity, I could do that again. And some of that did happen with awakening, even through like drug experimentation in college, and psychedelics and things like that. Oh, this is what I was seeing. Okay, it's okay. So there was a path back to the comfort level of that and not being scared.
And so now what retains for you is you can connect to the story of another person very empathically and almost like see their story as you're communicating with them.
Not always, sometimes, a lot of times. And the typical stuff when someone says, "Oh, I'm following my gut." For me, it's the clear vision of something, or I will get information out of nowhere and it'll come out of my mouth. And it's always funny and surprising to me. Or I'll actually close my eyes and look and see in a situation. Does this feel like the right path? Even if another person is coming to me, really having learned something that I think everyone, I'm going to use the should word, which I don't like to say much, but something called psychic courtesy, where you don't read someone when they don't want to be read or they haven't asked for it. So sometimes I will see something like, "Oh, that's about to happen. You're about to come into some very difficult terrain," but not saying it because it's not my business. And if someone asks, I have to ask too. Should I convey that information? So
what an interesting ability.
I know. I feel like there's so much to explore.
Yeah.
There.
I mean, it sounds like a psychological version of a medical intuitive, which could be super valuable for like a therapist or something. Anyway, but we probably should move on.
Move on.
Okay. So you are an intuitive child. It sparks your interest in your mother in parapsychology. She's got this apartment where everyone's coming and meeting. She gets hooked up with Helen Schucman and Bill Thetford, gets involved in the course. And the question I have is, how much contact did you have with Bill? And what do you remember about him?
A lot of contact with Bill, but as a teenager, not as an adult. Not as an adult who was interested in what he was doing. As a teenager who came and played with him with wordplay, a lot of wordplay, who was eating dinner with him at the end of a day, and talking over a meal of what I had done at school, or kind of different stories would come up about his own life that he'd share. Very much as just another person in the room, getting to know it and loving as a family member, but not being I was a teenager. I wasn't all that deeply interested in his psychological framework. And I could see things about him. I would always read the room between Helen and Ken and Bill and my mother, and the dynamics were intriguing to me because there was so much there and so much at play. And I found it funny, but my classic, and I think that was in Double Vision, although I haven't read that since I was 24 as well. My interactions would be coming in and saying to the whole room, in front of my mother, I'm going out now. And it was like 10:30 at night in New York City. And, her first response is, my mom was like, "No, you're not." And I'd be like, "Yeah, Mom, it's okay." And, and she'd say, or I'd say I was walking somewhere, it was dark, whatever. And she would say, "I don't think that's a good idea." And I'd say, "No, I'm just putting white light around me." And, she would whisper in my ear, "Bitch." It was our funny nickname to each other. It was like, "You got me," with my own stuff, as I would also follow her around the house, try and get her angry. And the moment she'd look and get about to be, throw the book at me, I'd say, "You're not practicing the course." And, I honored that teenage bitch.
You do have the white light in here. I remember reading about you saying, "I'm going to walk but I have the white light around me."
I really threw my mother Practice What You Preach. I threw that book at her a lot.
You mentioned just a minute ago that you'd come into a meeting with Helen and Bill and Judy and Ken, and the dynamic was interesting to you. What do you recall about that dynamic? What stands out?
Okay, remember, I am recalling that particular part as a teenager. I did get into my 20s and know Bill, probably, and Ken, more than Helen, who started to retreat and passed away. But I also, I was very close to Helen. She was fabulous with, children and young adults. She was a child psychologist. So we had just a great rapport. and she had a lot of respect for me and I had for her. But I saw, I'll just hit them all off one at a time. I saw Helen. She reminded me of like a white gloved, very proper person who could have a knife behind her back and then go back to being very proper. And I found it funny. Like I've never been afraid of the darker sides of personalities. Like, and that was a very defining difference in certain ways between my mother and me. My mother would just focus on the best of everyone. It was her practice too, but she also would and just see that. So people just felt like they were the most special people in the world when they were around her. Of course, separate from all the other stuff in the course world that people will bring up. But as a person and me watching her, she might say something afterwards about them that was disparaging. But when she was in the presence, she was very present. Whereas I'm much more inclusive of someone's dark sides or challenges and can love the whole picture instead of just that. And for better or worse, it's different in personality type. But in any case, so that Helen could hold the values of the course and even talk about it and get into that place of being very centered, which I completely respect and respected. I also saw the personality of Helen as sometimes terribly frightened, extremely manipulative, and completely using Ken to drive Bill nuts. And so it was interesting to have my mother come in the dynamics because, Helen was mad at Bill. She was in love with the guy. He was gay. And I adored Helen's husband, was very close to Jonathan, who she called Jonathan, we called Louie. Really had a deep relationship with him. And he actually asked me to do all these interviews of everyone who knew Helen and Bill, which I still have and have not published, because they got too whitewashed for me by editing. And I it's like becoming now the time to really bring them out. But anyway,
that'd be great. It'd be great to see
Yeah, we
those.
were going to ask you about that.
Total
too.
side story, but we'll get to that next. But I saw my mother get up and speak in front of people where everyone projected sainthood on her, to the point, I think that's in the book too, where they'd ask if they could touch me because I was related to her, and I was disgusted by it. And then I saw her listen to what I said, like, this is gross what you're creating. You curse, you have sex, and you get tired, you shit, and you get tired of people after these conferences, and here they are, like, putting you on this pedestal. And she showed up. She said, come to my talk in the afternoon. She showed up. She took the 3 books that were in 3 books then, stood on them, which people felt like they were like the Bible, and people were gasping, stood on them, said, it's not in there. It's not this. And she said, I curse. She said it more gently than I say it. But, I have relations with my husband. However she said it, she said what I had said. And people were crying. And after, they say, can I touch you? You're related to her. And it was an invaluable lesson of seeing what people will project on someone. And the greater lesson was in seeing what they need to in order for their own development and not to judge it. And, like Bill called it the bliss ninnies. He just wanted to be kept away from the bliss ninnies. Just don't let me near the bliss ninnies. And so in the dynamic of this room, Helen was in love with Bill, angry that he did not return that kind of love. Ken was there as a very devoted, shy, stuttering human being. I saw him, I saw him going, wow, who are you really? But it was in 100% devotion. So I was intrigued. It was like, wow, he's doing everything he says, even though he knows she's creating discord within the relationship with him, but he's so devoted in a way that I had never seen.
How would Helen use Ken to drive Bill crazy?
Oh, she would have, okay, details. She would, and I'm speaking in energetics, so you get me into details, but she would correct him through Ken at certain times. And she would, in certain ways, she'd give her affection to Ken. So that was really the core of it, her affection and approval of Ken, while she was sometimes disdaining of Bill. And the disdain came from her own pain that I could see, but she showed it publicly, meaning in front of my mother and me. And she didn't hold it back, because there they were 2 years in, working together every day on the course. And then, my she was such a, do-gooder and caregiver that she would take care of Bill. And that set a dynamic up with Helen and my mother. And Helen and my mother Helen put forth a lot of messaging that my mother and my mother and Ken were siblings in this family. They were siblings, but siblings have sibling rivalry as well. So the setup in the dynamics was really interesting. And I would say on a comfort level, my mother was way more comfortable with Bill, and Ken was way more comfortable with Helen, but they were all very devoted to this work that they were trying to do together. And the dynamics with each privately were very different than they were publicly. And the dynamics were different with just 3 of them there than all 4 of them. And that's the energy that I could read of, when Bill's not here, look at the difference that goes on with, Helen and Ken.
Question for you. You said that you knew, this is a personal question, just out of my own curiosity, but you said that you were close with Louie. And whenever, you're saying Helen was in love with Bill, we've heard that a lot. Carol Howe has said that. Was Louie ever threatened by Bill in any way? Did Louie ever express any jealousy of the relationship between Helen and Bill?
No, Louie was such an extraordinary man, and he was really quite brilliant intellectually, quite brilliant, and also clueless. He had an aspect of him that was so clueless that it was funny. And he saw Helen as he saw her, and he was committed to seeing her that way and only that way. Nothing could change his mind, which is why he had me do these interviews. And he was so secure in his relationship with Helen, and he knew Bill was gay. I mean, Bill built them a room for themselves in his Fire Island home. He knew the dynamics. He wasn't threatened at all. He did not know that A Course in Miracles was being written. He did not know that she called him that Helen called Bill in the middle of the night and said, "I think I'm going crazy." He didn't even care. That's what was so funny. He truly didn't care. And he called it that book.
Yeah, when Marianne Williamson has a funny story, she said that when she met Louie, the one and only time she met Louie, he said, "I hear you're a fan of my wife's book." That's what he said.
Always.
My wife's book.
And even at the funeral, at Helen's funeral, he completely instructed, I was there, he instructed my mother not to talk about the book. And so she tried not to, but it ended up, a question came in from one of the cousins who had heard something, and my mother started to quietly talk about it, and suddenly the whole room was there, which is always what happened with my mother anyway. And everyone was so interested and Louie was completely surprised and not upset, just thought it was funny then. So no, I never detected jealousy. I detected kind of a bemused attitude that Helen and Bill had friction, and he saw it in a professional, personal way, but not in a taking it personal sort of way. And he never felt like, there wasn't a threat. Bill was really clear, and that's where all the anger was. Bill wasn't even give a little. The Tam Morgan version of A Course in Miracles was that Helen was a brilliant psychologist, and Spirit, she was like, "We've got to find a better way." Helen was tortured, and her gift from spirit was she got to spend private, special time with Bill every day, doing something that Bill was in love with, that he was going, oh my God. And Helen and he partnered in love, in something that she got a piece of Bill and his attention and his love and everything else for those years. And then when it became public, meaning brought to my mother, everything blew up in a certain way. And Helen even said to my mother, you know why I'm dying, don't you? And my mother said, why? And she said, to get out of its way. And so it was, so that's my story.
I had some sympathy for Helen in that position of being in love with Bill. It must have been very hard for her, that dynamic.
I'm curious, like you've got these 30 interviews with Helen's closest friends and colleagues and confidants.
Helen and Bill.
Helen and Bill's. Okay, so
they're separate.
Okay, so with Helen, like you have all this material and you had to do the interviews and all that and process it. What were the big takeaways for you about Helen that emerged from the interviews?
The same takeaway I always had. Helen was a complicated, interesting, brilliant individual. And I loved her conflict with the Course. I loved it. It made it so much more believable to me that she could, in psychological terms, almost compartmentalize and allow something to come through. Again, I think as a gift to Bill and her and their relationship. And that's part of why she was so completely committed, not because it was the voice of Jesus coming through her, but because this was a vehicle of love for her. But she didn't necessarily believe it, and yet she believed it completely. Anyway, so the long answer, which you'll always get from me to that question, is I really respected Helen, and I respected her suffering around it, and it made it all the more true for me. It's like, that feels like what I do. And that's why I felt that the message of this, no matter how it got fumbled in words, the message itself was important and that resonated with truth to me.
As you're talking, Tam, I'm just thinking about Helen and this experience, and I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for her in the channeling as well, because as I was saying, it's right there in the beginning. It legitimizes the Course for me too, that at the beginning of the notes, he's trying to get her to pay attention and she's not doing it. And like, who would write that? If it's just her own mind, who would write that kind of argumentation with yourself? And then as you get into the later parts of the Course, where you can tell in the notes that she's writing so fast and she's writing in perfect iambic pentameter. And I mean, it's just genius. And so at the beginning, when she's wrestling with it, all the way to the end where it's just flowing in such beautiful language, and again, perfect iambic pentameter, it's such a incredible piece of wisdom for the world. And I know this is the natural place to stop. When we pick up again, we'll talk more about the Course's publication and particularly your involvement with the foundation and where you see it going from there. So,
okay, I will add that to move into a little unnatural of place to stop, I don't think I finished in my nonlinear way, because I started with Helen, but I didn't really get to my teenage experience of Bill, of Ken, of my mother there. So I will do that for the next couple of minutes, just so that this part's complete. So told you, and we could explore hours about this, but right now that's Helen. Ken, as I said, I saw as this stuttering, serving, devotionally serving, like someone would serve a guru. Whatever she said, he did, no matter how ridiculous it was. He was there supporting her, loving her, giving her what I would say she wanted from Bill. And it was an extraordinary thing to see. And I did see it as a child. And I saw, or as a teen. And then I saw my mother as I saw Bill put up with stuff, like amazing stuff. He put up with stuff and he deflected it through humor beautifully, a lot through humor beautifully. And there were times where I'd see him contracting so much. And then my mother, she was the peacemaker role, would bring up something from the course. And next thing you know, he and Helen would be holding hands, and the breath that got brought in. But my mother was totally a people pleaser and was there constantly to bring peace to this situation. And sometimes it was very hard. And she also, she did foster a much closer relationship with Bill by going, God, do I see what you're going through? Whereas Ken was there for Helen, and my mother's wasn't devotional to Bill, but it really was sibling loving. That was more of a sibling loving. And with Ken, my mother, I will say this for the record, she was afraid of him, especially as he moved into his own strength and his own, I don't mean power in any megalomaniac way, but I mean his own self, where his stuttering was taken care of, where he became more of a mature man. And but he had some very, very strong opinions, and my mother didn't stand up to him in her opinions because she was extremely non-confrontational. And therein were a lot of the dynamics that will come up when we get to part 2.
Pam,
Yeah,
just real
be good to
quickly
hear about those.
before we, do you think that Judy being afraid of Ken caused her to step back in her own teaching function as he stepped forward?
She never, ever, ever considered herself a teacher. She considered herself at best a spokesperson for the course. Never considers it. She never considered herself a psychic or intuitive. She was always self-effacing in that way. And so she felt that Ken was the teacher and she was not. So that wasn't out of fear. The fear came in her life when she didn't necessarily agree with certain things he was doing or being or seeing, but she didn't want to cause conflict. And that caused conflict between her and my 2 stepfathers. I mean, there was a lot in there in all of those dynamics that moved towards healing because that was their goal. But I think my mother most came into her own when everyone else had passed away.
We have been saying the same thing, that when Ken passed away, Judy stepped forward more, and we both feel the course community could have really used Judy's voice more all along, and Bill's too.
Yeah. Well, I will say Bill didn't want that for anything. Remember, he was still closeted. So he didn't want that. It was part of his personality, being in the CIA. He was closeted in so many areas, and he didn't want to be that at all. He was shy and he was adorable, but he wasn't a spokesperson that way. And my mother, I think she just felt set free in the last part, because she could also, when my grandmother turned 80, she said, I can say, she somehow felt like she had permission to say anything she wanted that she never said the first part of her life. And it was very funny. And some of it was offensive, but my mother felt free that she could just say what she felt in a much clearer way. And some of that involved apologies. But I will say, and this was the last thing for now, that my mother was never interested in a course community. She was interested in giving people the course. She was not interested at all, limited in what the course community was doing. She pulled away. She had a heart attack from the lawsuit, she was just, I'm going to do the job I promised to do, to, publish and distribute this. She was way less interested. She felt Ken handled discuss. And, discussion came in as Ken, moved out. But she truly didn't care. She didn't care about these conversations. She just cared to do like I say, she anchored the course in the world to bring it here. For better or for worse, it was given to me in a variety of humorous ways. And I care about community. I care. I'm in the world of the internet. I helped bring the course into the digital arena. So for whatever reason or purpose I'm here, this is what's going on. But my mother, it wasn't her function in her mind or her interest, even though she traveled 100,000 miles in a year to talk about the course. It wasn't her function in her mind to either teach it or to create community or to help community.
Well, it seems like we have so much more to talk about.
I know we're interested in when you came into the foundation, and particularly when you stepped up to lead it. I remember hearing you speak at a conference a few years ago where after resisting getting involved in the foundation for a long time, you agreed to it and then heard a voice that said, "Gotcha." Does that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we shouldn't steal our thunder from part 2.
No, but I do want to do one little correction. I do not lead this foundation. I listen and spirit leads it. I show up, I serve, but I do not see myself as the usual leader. And so every time someone says I'm the leader, it's like, it's not me, and I don't feel totally self-effacing like my mother did about this. I really listen. And truly, if it means the foundation for inner peace disappears, then it does. I listen. And I can't tell you if I listen to the same voice that Helen listened to. I can tell you I listen and I'm committed to that. And that's why I'm here with you guys.
Well, we can't wait to get into more of that. Thank you for this conversation, Tam, and thank you for agreeing to a second part. We're really looking forward to continuing the discussion.
We'll keep stringing you along, part 12.
And I know.
But as I say, when I hear to show up, I show up. If we're at part 12 and I hear, no more, I won't.
Yeah. We'll see you next time, Tam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.